Gate agent blocks black woman from boarding. She owns the plane and the airline. One of the busiest airports in the world hums with frenetic energy, ticket scanners beeping, overhead announcements echoing, and passengers rushing to board on time. You stand in line with your boarding pass in hand, ready for a flight you've taken countless times until a gate agent stops you in your tracks. The denial feels senseless at first, until the harsh undertone of prejudice becomes impossible to ignore. Unbeknownst to the agent, the traveler he's trying to block isn't a typical passenger. She's a visionary who owns both the plane and the entire airline. This is where her fight for justice ignites. Ella James grew up in a modest neighborhood near Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, surrounded by the thunderous roar of jet engines and the unwavering support of her mother, Denise. From an early age, she was mesmerized by the sight of planes cutting through the sky. While other kids chased after ice cream trucks or played jump rope, Ella was busy imagining herself at the controls of those powerful aircraft above. In their cozy bungalow, the walls seemed to echo with her mother's faith in her daughter's potential. Denise often reminded Ella that the sky is just the beginning, urging her to aim for greatness. As a teenager, Ella pored over books about aviation history, devouring biographies of pioneers like Amelia Earhart and Bessie Coleman. Every Christmas, she insisted on receiving airplane model kits instead of dolls, painstakingly assembling each one to display in her room. Despite financial hardships and skeptical classmates who dismissed her ambitious goals, Ella refused to give up. She worked part-time jobs to save for flight lessons, determined to feel the rush of a plane's engine under her own hands. On her 16th birthday, she finally experienced her first flight in a tiny Cessna. That day, the moment the wheels lifted off the runway, everything clicked. She was meant to soar, literally and figuratively. Her family was both amused and proud of her unshakable focus on flying. But Ella had bigger dreams than just becoming a pilot. She envisioned building an airline that welcomed everyone, no matter their background or resources. She wanted to reshape the aviation industry, making travel accessible, efficient, and uplifting. While those around her applauded her determination, many found it hard to believe that a black girl from a working-class neighborhood could someday command a fleet of planes. Yet Ella's fierce spirit wouldn't be quelled. Each challenge, whether lack of money, limited opportunities, or subtle prejudice, only hardened her resolve. She grew convinced that the only way to truly make her mark was to rise above every setback, the way airplanes rose above clouds. And in her heart, she carried the unshakable belief that if she wanted it badly enough, she could turn her skybound dreams into a soaring reality. After graduating high school, Ella's next step was to enroll in a reputable aviation program. She set her sights on Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, widely recognized as a top institution for aspiring pilots. The tuition was daunting, but Ella was not one to flinch in the face of financial hurdles. She applied for countless scholarships, wrote heart-wrenching essays about her love for flight, and spent weekends volunteering at the local aviation museum to demonstrate her dedication. Miraculously, with a patchwork of grants, loans, and a partial scholarship, Ella was accepted. Arriving at Embry-Riddle's Daytona Beach campus felt like stepping into a dream. She was surrounded by fellow aviation enthusiasts, people who found joy in discussing engine specifications, flight routes, and weather patterns. They were an eclectic group from all over the country and the world, each with a shared obsession, the sky. However, life didn't suddenly become a fairy tale. The financial strain meant Ella had to juggle a near full-time job at a local diner to cover her living expenses. She rose before dawn to review flight manuals and class notes. Then she dashed to her morning flight lab, absorbing every piece of knowledge she could. Afternoons were devoted to classroom lectures, and evenings found her waiting tables until close. This relentless schedule left little room for socializing, sleep, or self-care. On more than a few occasions, Ella collapsed into bed with her uniform still on, greasy from the kitchen and mentally drained from the day's rigors. In the face of such adversity, Ella's iron will refuse to crack. If anything, the hardship fueled her determination. She watched some of her classmates, who came from wealthier backgrounds, breeze through the coursework with private tutors and sponsored study groups. While Ella sometimes felt envy, she also recognized how her struggle was forging an unbreakable spirit. Each challenge hammered her resolve into something impervious to doubt or fear. Embry-Riddle wasn't always welcoming. Subtle discrimination lingered, even in a progressive academic setting. Ella was one of the few black women in her program, and she encountered microaggressions that stabbed deeper than any overt act of bigotry. Classmates questioned her abilities, some instructors overlooked her, and there was the occasional sneer when she asked for help. Yet Ella met these moments with grace and unyielding confidence. She surrounded herself with supportive friends like her roommate, Lila, a fiercely intelligent engineer who dreamt of designing more fuel-efficient engines. Their late-night conversations often turned into brainstorming sessions about the future of aviation. With Ella's vision and Lila's technical genius, they'd sketch entire fleets of planes, each scribble symbolizing a piece of the airline Ella hoped to create. When Ella finally took her first solo flight, it was both a heart-stopping and rapturous experience. She was trembling as she read the pre-flight checklist, her mind racing with every scenario that could go wrong. But once the wheels lifted off the runway, she felt a calm clarity she had never experienced before. It was as though the sky itself whispered encouragement, telling her that this was her rightful place. Her progress was swift and undeniable. Despite her intense schedule, Ella aced her practical exams, soared through navigation courses, and excelled in meteorology. One day, an instructor pulled her aside to commend her dedication. He told her that in all his years of teaching, few possessed her combination of technical prowess, discipline, and unrelenting passion. It was a compliment Ella tucked close to her heart, a reminder on days when exhaustion threatened to take the wheel. By her junior year, Ella began to sense that her dream of someday owning an airline wasn't as outlandish as people once told her. She was earning her stripes, proving her worth. She understood not just the mechanics of flight, but also the business underpinnings of the airline industry. Between classes in airport management and late-night deep dives into aviation economics, Ella was methodically piecing together the blueprint of her future. Each page in her notebook was filled with sketches of plane liveries, potential airline names, and ideas for in-flight services that would make even the most jaded traveler feel at home. That unwavering determination she'd carried from Atlanta was paying dividends. A seed had taken root, nurtured by the discipline of flight school and the spark of Ella's unquenchable imagination. She was no longer just a dreamer, she was a woman on the cusp of making her dreams reality. Upon completing her degree, Ella landed her first aviation job, a co-pilot position at a small regional carrier named Southern View Airlines. Based out of a secondary airport near Charlotte, North Carolina, Southern View was a modest operation with a handful of routes. The pay was meager, the schedule brutal, and the aircraft older than Ella cared to admit. But it was a start. She donned her uniform proudly, stepping into the cockpit each day with a mix of gratitude and ambition. Her colleagues at Southern View were a mixed bunch. Some were supportive and delighted by her potential, offering mentorship and advice whenever they could. Others, however, eyed her with an air of skepticism. Women in the cockpit were still not as common as Ella would have liked, and a black woman at the controls was rarer still. She learned to navigate the subtle politics of the airline, how to read the tension in a captain's voice, how to handle ground crew who refused to take her instructions seriously, how to remain unflappable. When passengers double-checked, they were on the right flight after glimpsing her in the pilot's seat. Yet Ella refused to let the naysayers define her experience. She worked diligently, often volunteering for extra shifts to rack up hours and build her credibility. During downtimes, she studied everything from customer service protocols to logistics. She befriended flight attendants and maintenance crew alike, gleaning insights into every facet of airline operations. Ella even spent her days off poring over corporate paperwork she found in the airline's operational manuals, studying how scheduling, maintenance cycles, and hub strategies were planned. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. One fateful day, the CEO of Southern View Airlines, Gregory Palmer, flew on a test route for an internal inspection. Ella happened to be on the crew roster. Impressed by her calm, precise handling of a minor mechanical glitch in flight, Palmer requested a conversation with her after the plane touched down. Nervous but exhilarated, Ella walked into Palmer's modest corner office wearing her slightly worn uniform, her heart pounding like a drum. Palmer wasted no time with pleasantries. "I've heard good things, Ella, and I saw them for myself today. You've got a real gift." She felt her cheeks grow warm. "Thank you, sir. I just love what I do." He nodded, then leaned forward. "I'm always on the lookout for talent. How would you feel about joining our route expansion committee? It's mostly managerial, analyzing new city pairs we might serve. It's not a promotion per se, but it'll give you corporate insight." Her eyes widened. "I'd love that. Thank you so much for the opportunity." "Don't thank me yet," Palmer said with a half smile. "There's real work involved, but if you're up for it, we can use someone with a pilot's perspective." And with that, Ella found herself catapulted into the airline's corporate structure, an experience that would prove invaluable. Her day job remained in the cockpit, but evenings and weekends were spent in committee meetings, presentations, and strategic debates about how Southern View could remain competitive. She contributed ideas on niche routes underserved by larger carriers, drawing on her knowledge of local communities and her own experiences traveling on a budget. At first, her proposals were met with polite skepticism, but it didn't take long for the board to see the brilliance behind her suggestions. Within a year, Southern View had launched a new route to a smaller airport in Mississippi, a move Ella passionately advocated. Unexpectedly, that route turned profitable within months, garnering attention in regional aviation circles. Ella's star was on the rise. Palmer, pleased with her performance, started inviting her to higher-level meetings. Investors even perked up, hearing about the dynamic young pilot who seemed to have an uncanny knack for spotting growth opportunities. Yet amid this budding success, Ella felt a growing restlessness. She yearned to implement changes more sweeping than what Southern View's conservative approach allowed. While Palmer was supportive, the airline's board was wary of risk. They weren't prepared to radically redefine the customer experience or heavily invest in next-gen aircraft. And Ella realized, perhaps for the first time, that her grand dream of transforming the airline industry from the inside out might never be fulfilled working under someone else's banner. Still, she kept her thoughts private, choosing instead to absorb the knowledge, refine her expertise, and expand her network. Every misstep was a lesson in humility, every small victory a lesson in leadership. She spent late nights at her cramped apartment drafting potential business plans for her own airline. She played with names, corporate colors, even possible slogans. The working title she kept coming back to was Skyward Spirit, a reflection of her belief that flight could elevate the human experience, bridging gaps and uniting souls from far-flung corners of the world. With each passing day, Ella's confidence soared. She was no longer just the starry-eyed girl from Atlanta, gazing longingly at the sky. She was a commercial pilot, a budding executive, a woman poised to someday carve her own path in an industry that had yet to see the likes of her. The pieces were coming together slowly, methodically, yet undoubtedly. All she needed was the right moment to strike. Around the time Ella was making waves at Southern View, she received a phone call that changed her life. Her mother, Denise, had been diagnosed with a serious heart condition. Faced with the possibility of losing the woman who shaped her life's purpose, Ella felt her world tilt. She took a leave of absence from her airline duties to return to Atlanta and care for her mother. Days turned into weeks as she accompanied Denise to doctor's appointments, monitored her medication, and offered emotional support. During those months at home, a profound clarity enveloped Ella. Sitting by her mother's bedside in the same modest bungalow where she grew up, she reflected on all she'd accomplished and all she still hoped to achieve. Denise, weakened but determined to remain cheerful, never stopped encouraging her daughter. One afternoon, as Ella fussed over adjusting her pillows, Denise placed a trembling hand over Ella's. "Don't let my illness hold you back," she whispered. "Make your dreams real, sweetheart." Denise's words felt like a clarion call. Ella realized that life was too fragile to keep waiting for the perfect moment. She couldn't rely on slow-moving corporate structures or hope that some existing airline would share her vision. Her mother's battle for health reminded Ella that time was precious, and if she truly wanted to build something extraordinary, she had to do it now. As Denise's health stabilized, Ella returned to Southern View with a renewed sense of urgency. She approached Gregory Palmer with a bold idea. She wanted to pitch an internal pilot program that would transform the passenger experience from ticket booking to in-flight entertainment. Palmer seemed intrigued until he read the details. Ella proposed an overhaul that required substantial investment, collaboration with tech partners, and a revamped training program for staff. The board balked at the cost. Although they respected Ella, they dismissed her ideas as too aggressive for their budget and too radical for their conservative market. The rejection stung, but it also galvanized Ella into action. She recognized that her blueprint was bigger than Southern View could handle. So she made an agonizing choice. She resigned from her position. Colleagues expressed shock, some even dismay, urging her to reconsider. But Ella stood firm, fueled by a conviction she hadn't felt since the day she first watched a plane ascend from Hartsfield-Jackson. She was done trying to retrofit her dreams into someone else's business model. It was time to create her own. Using her savings, a small inheritance from her late father, and a loan from a local community development fund in Atlanta, Ella founded SkyShield Airways. She had replaced Skyward Spirit with SkyShield because she wanted the name to evoke not just flight, but also protection and care, an airline that would shield and uplift its passengers. The initial venture was microscopic by industry standards. She leased one used Embraer Joan 145, a 50-seater, and set up a small operational base near Atlanta. Her first hires were a ragtag team of industry newcomers and seasoned veterans who believed in her mission to create an airline experience defined by genuine hospitality, innovation, and inclusivity. Lila, her old roommate from college, came on board as chief technical officer. Another flight school friend took the lead on crew training, emphasizing empathy as much as safety protocols. They decided to test run limited routes between Atlanta and smaller cities that were often overlooked by major carriers, places like Augusta, Georgia, and Greenville, South Carolina. Ella personally captained many of these inaugural flights, greeting passengers at the boarding door, ensuring they felt seen and valued. The response was astonishing. Passengers wrote heartfelt letters thanking SkyShield for providing reliable service to their hometowns, praising the airline's warm staff and efficient flights. Local newspapers ran glowing articles about the new airline built on Southern charm and modern innovation. With each successful trip, Ella's confidence grew. The profits were modest, but they were enough to keep SkyShield afloat and justify expansion. Within a year, she added a second plane to the fleet, a slightly larger regional jet. Perhaps the most significant moment came when Ella approached the city council of a small but burgeoning community in Alabama, pitching a new route that promised to boost local tourism and commerce. She proposed partnering with local businesses to offer special ticket packages. While city officials had been rebuffed by major carriers for years, Ella's plan was both feasible and community-oriented. They eagerly greenlit the proposal, and soon SkyShield was the talk of the town, hailed as a symbol of empowerment and a catalyst for economic development. Yet Ella was not content to stop there. Even as she kept her airline afloat through carefully chosen routes and partnerships, she had her eyes on bigger planes and broader horizons. She began cultivating relationships with venture capitalists, intrigued by her success in underserved markets. Slowly but surely, she was assembling the financial might needed to scale up her operation. Every deal, every pitch, every negotiation brought SkyShield one step closer to Ella's grand vision, an airline that could stand toe-to-toe with the giants. In the midst of all this chaos, Ella found a sense of peace. She was working harder than ever, drafting proposals at midnight, flying early morning routes, and attending city council meetings by afternoon, but she was on her own path, guided by an unwavering moral compass. She thought of her mother's unwavering faith, her father's memory, and the determination that had propelled her from a girl in Atlanta to the helm of a fledgling airline. She could almost see the horizon stretching out before her, limitless as the sky she cherished. Years passed in a blur of expansion and adaptation. Under Ella's leadership, SkyShield Airways methodically grew from a tiny regional carrier into a mid-sized airline boasting a fleet that included several Boeing 737s and Airbus A320s. Real investors took notice. After negotiations with a notable venture capital group in Silicon Valley, Ella secured enough funding to lease a few long-range aircraft. She opened new routes connecting Atlanta to key hubs like Dallas, Chicago, and New York. The airline's success was evident not just in its route map, but also in its reputation. SkyShield had become synonymous with respect, reliability, and forward-thinking service. Ella made sure her hiring practices actively encouraged diversity, from pilots to top executives. As a result, people of all backgrounds flocked to the airline, drawn by a genuine culture of inclusion. Flight attendants weren't just there to smile and serve drinks. Ella had them cross-trained in conflict resolution and empathy building. Pilots were encouraged to mentor aspiring aviators from underrepresented communities. Every touchpoint was designed to make people feel valued and safe. Meanwhile, Ella herself became something of a public figure. She spoke at high schools and on university panels, often referencing her own struggles at Embry-Riddle and the challenges of being a black female entrepreneur in a historically male-dominated industry. Interviews with aviation magazines cast her as an innovator. She remained poised, articulate, and humble, always redirecting praise to her dedicated teams. But Ella's monumental success did not come without personal sacrifice. She rarely took days off, often living out of hotels near her expanding network of airports. She missed family gatherings, birthdays, and weekends that could have been spent with friends. Her relationships suffered. Though she tried dating, it was hard for anyone to keep up with her relentless schedule, let alone her consuming passion. Yet Ella forged on, convinced that her airline was more than just a business, it was a statement of possibility. All that progress led to the fateful day when Ella decided to personally inspect a new route launch from Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport to San Diego International Airport. She knew that first impressions could make or break a new service, and she wanted everything to run smoothly. Although Ella often flew her own airline's planes, this particular flight was being operated by another captain. Ella planned to ride in the cabin as a passenger so she could observe the service from a customer's perspective. As she pulled into the parking area reserved for upper management, Ella felt a rare sense of calm. She was no longer the anxious, bright-eyed dreamer trying to scramble her way into an industry. She was a force in that industry, an owner, a leader, someone who had proven her worth time and again. The flight was due to depart in 3 hours, and Ella had arrived early to check on gate preparations, meet with ground staff, and finalize last-minute details with the operations manager. She strolled through the terminal, wearing a sleek black blazer and matching trousers. She looked every bit the successful businesswoman she was, though no one would guess her identity at a glance unless they recognized her face from the occasional newspaper article or top 100 entrepreneurs under 40 list. That was perfectly fine with Ella. She was proud but not ostentatious. She wanted to see how her staff interacted with everyday passengers, unfiltered by the awareness that the boss was watching. When she reached gate E23, Ella immediately noticed a swirl of activity. A line of passengers waited to check in, some clutching boarding passes, others with ID in hand. A fresh-faced gate agent, Ryan West, was scanning boarding passes and verifying seats. The entire area buzzed with the usual cacophony of airport life, last-minute announcements, the hum of escalators, the rolling thunder of distant luggage carts. Ella took a moment to observe. A flight attendant was helping a young mother calm her crying baby. An elderly man in a wheelchair was being assisted by a customer service agent. Everything looked organized, albeit slightly hectic. She approached the gate to board, offering the agent a polite smile. At first, Ryan barely glanced up. He was in the middle of verifying a family's seats. That's odd, Ella thought. He should at least greet people. But she shrugged it off, attributing it to the demands of the job. When it was finally Ella's turn, she presented her boarding pass on her phone. Ryan scanned it, frowning momentarily at the name. Ella smiled in a friendly manner. Lovely day for a flight, isn't it? Ryan nodded curtly, still not really looking at her. Your ID, please. Ella complied, handing over her driver's license. She watched as Ryan's face twisted in confusion. Are you sure you're on the right flight? He asked abruptly, glancing from her ID to his monitor. The tone was skeptical, if not downright accusatory. Ella blinked. Yes, I'm certain. He returned her ID with an air of impatience. Okay, Miss James. Just hold on a second. A prick of unease touched Ella. She stepped aside, giving Ryan room to process whatever was occupying his screen. She observed him lean over to whisper to a fellow agent, eyebrows knit in some form of disapproval. Something about the exchange felt off, but Ella decided to remain calm. After all, this was her airline, her staff, and if there was a problem, it should be a simple misunderstanding. Little did she realize this was only the beginning of a fiasco that would shake her composure, test her resolve, and ignite a conflagration of events she could never have predicted. Ella heard muffled whispers as Ryan conferred with his colleague. Passengers behind her grew restless, unsure why the boarding process had halted. A few glanced in Ella's direction, curiosity peeking out from behind their boredom. Finally, Ryan stepped forward, his expression stern. Miss James, he began, we're having trouble verifying your seat assignment. Do you have your original booking confirmation? Ella's brows furrowed. Of course, she replied, scrolling through her phone to retrieve the email. She held the screen up, showing the record locator and the e-receipt. Here it is. He gave the email a perfunctory glance, then turned his eyes back to Ella, narrowing them. And you said you're on the right flight? At this point, Ella felt a hint of anger swirl in her stomach. Something was clearly amiss. Yes, she repeated, forcing her voice to remain even. This is flight 4459, right? Departing for San Diego at 3:15 p.m. I booked it through the official Sky Shield Airways site. Everything should be in order. Ryan's colleague, a slightly older agent named Valerie, gently touched his arm. Ryan, maybe check the passenger manifest again, she suggested, noticing the tension. Ryan huffed and typed furiously on his computer, glancing between Ella and the screen. After a few seconds, he shook his head. I'm not seeing your name in the system. Are you sure it's this airline? Ella paused, perplexed. Yes, I'm sure. I own this airline. A few nearby passengers overheard, exchanging puzzled looks. Ryan let out a short, disbelieving laugh, loud enough for people to notice. You own Sky Shield? Right, he said sarcastically, rolling his eyes. Look, ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside. We have a busy flight to board, and I don't have time for games. The temperature around Ella seemed to plummet. She felt an instant flush of humiliation and fury. This wasn't just a simple glitch. Ryan was showing open disrespect, maybe even blatant discrimination. Yet Ella's instincts told her to handle the situation diplomatically. Is there a supervisor available? She asked, keeping her voice controlled. Ryan crossed his arms. We'll get one for you when we can. He turned to the next passenger in line, effectively dismissing Ella. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some travelers stepped back, unsure whether to intervene or mind their own business. Valerie looked at Ella apologetically. Miss James, I can try to help, she whispered, leaning over the counter so other passengers wouldn't overhear. But Ryan is the lead agent on this shift. Let's say he's been strict about protocol. I'm not sure what's going on. Ella inhaled, steadying herself. Thank you. Yes, please help me sort this out. This must be a misunderstanding. She managed a calm tone, though inside her pulse thundered. She could see how Ryan was looking at her, like she was some kind of imposter, and it stung hard. Valerie tapped a few commands on her terminal. Her face brightened. I see your name in the system, Miss James, right here. She turned the screen discreetly so Ella could see. Indeed, Ella's seat assignment 4A was listed under her frequent flyer profile. There must be a technical glitch on Ryan's system, Valerie said, glancing uneasily at her colleague. I'll print your boarding pass from my station. Before she could finalize the command, Ryan noticed. Don't do that, Valerie, he snapped. I just told you she's not in the system. We can't have people sneaking onto flights. Sneaking onto flights, Ella repeated, incredulous. This is beyond ridiculous. She felt the indignation of every microaggression she had endured in her life well up. I've shown you my ID, my booking confirmation. Valerie can see my seat assignment. Why are you refusing to print my boarding pass? Ryan let out a dismissive scoff. Maybe the system is glitching. Happens sometimes. But I'm not taking any chances with possible fraud. Ella tried not to let the word fraud ignite her temper, but it was too late. Your colleague can literally see my confirmed seat, she said firmly, gesturing to the screen. Ryan squared his shoulders, unapologetic. MAAM, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the boarding area so we can clear these other passengers. We'll try to figure out your situation after that. The audacity left Ella momentarily speechless. Passengers were now fully aware of the tension, some whispering, others openly watching. A few looked appalled. One woman whispered to her partner, she said she owns the airline. Do you think that's true? The partner shrugged uncertainly. Another passenger, a middle-aged black woman, shook her head, anger flickering in her eyes as if she understood exactly what was happening. Summoning her composure, Ella asked in a measured tone, "Are you denying me boarding?" Ryan nodded curtly. Until further notice, yes. Ella clenched her fists at her sides, determined not to lose control. That's a grave mistake. She glanced at Valerie, who seemed on the verge of tears, guilt washing over her features. "Valerie, please get the ground supervisor." Now, Valerie looked from Ryan to Ella, clearly torn, but eventually she complied, picking up a phone to place a call. Ella stood off to the side, fuming and embarrassed. She couldn't recall the last time she'd felt so powerless ironic, given that this was her own airline, her own plane, her own carefully built empire. But in that moment, she was just another black woman confronted by prejudice. The gate area grew quieter as passengers sensed the tension. Some children peered at Ella with wide eyes, probably wondering why the grown-ups were fighting. Ella forced a small smile at a little girl who clutched a teddy bear. The child smiled back tentatively. Meanwhile, Ella's mind raced. What if the gate's supervisor doesn't show up in time? What if the flight departs without me? Rationally, she knew that as the airline's owner, she could contact upper management or even airport security, but the emotional toll was heavy. She had always prided herself on how inclusive and fair SkyShield Airways was. Yet here, in a heart-wrenching twist of irony, she was being profiled and blocked from boarding her own plane. A swirl of conflicting emotions seized her. Anger, sadness, humiliation, and a fierce determination coalesced in her chest. One thing was clear. By the end of this day, something had to change. If an employee of her airline could treat any passenger like this, then Ella had much work to do. She just never expected that her day of reckoning would come like this, in front of a gawking crowd at Hartsfield-Jackson, the very place where her dreams took flight. 10 tense minutes later, a petite woman in an airport operations vest hurried over. Her name tag read, "Tamara, Ground Supervisor." Valerie caught her attention, and Tamara quickly approached, scanning the situation. Ryan looked up, his expression half impatient, half annoyed. Ella's heart pounded, her frustration replaced by a resolute calm. She was done playing nice. Tamara cleared her throat. "I'm Tamara, the ground supervisor. What seems to be the issue?" She looked between Ella and Ryan, her eyes resting on Ella with concern. "Thank you for coming," Ella said, dipping her head in respect. "I'm Ella James. I have a valid ticket for flight 4459 to San Diego. Ryan here refuses to acknowledge my booking, despite another agent seeing my name in the system. I've already provided my ID and confirmation." Tamara frowned, flipping open a tablet to access the airline's internal systems. "Let me take a look." In less than a minute she found Ella's reservation. "It's right here, seat 4A. Ella exhaled, relief mingling with anger. She glanced pointedly at Ryan. "So we're in agreement that my booking is valid?" Tamara nodded. "Absolutely. Miss James, everything checks out." She turned to Ryan. "Why was there an issue?" Ryan shrugged, an odd mix of defensiveness and condescension. "She said she owns the airline, like, that's not suspicious?" "I was just following protocol to ensure no fraudulent boarding. We've had cases of stolen identities," and Tamara raised a hand to silence him. "Whether she owns the airline or not isn't the point. Our system confirms her seat, so that should have been enough. If you had doubts, you could have discreetly verified with corporate before causing a scene." A faint ripple of applause broke out among a few passengers, but it quickly died down. Ella felt a wave of gratitude for Tamara's professionalism, but she wasn't finished. "I'm also Ella James, the CEO of SkyShield Airways," she said evenly, her gaze piercing Ryan. "I didn't appreciate being publicly humiliated." Tamara's eyes widened in recognition. She'd seen Ella in company memos, leadership bulletins, and news articles. "Oh my God, Miss James, the first so sorry," Tamara stammered. "I had no idea you were traveling today." Ella nodded graciously. "I understand. I wanted to see our process from a passenger's perspective, but what I experienced here, this level of hostility, is completely unacceptable." She turned to Ryan. "You refused to let me board my own plane, even after your colleague verified my seat. Why?" Ryan's cheeks flushed. "I was trying to do my job," he insisted. "You didn't look like you belonged in first class, and you were acting like..." "Like what?" Ella interrupted, her voice tinged with an edge she rarely used. "Like a paying passenger with a confirmed seat? Like a human being who deserves respect? Or was it more about the color of my skin?" A hush fell over the gate area. Ryan looked away, unable to meet her eyes. Tamara's lips pressed into a tight line. She addressed Ryan in a clipped tone. "Let's continue this discussion in a private setting. Miss James," the first deeply apologized for this incident. "Of course, you're welcome to board immediately. We'll also be offering a gesture of goodwill." Ella held up a hand. "That's not necessary for me personally. But if this is how employees treat a CEO in disguise, how are they treating everyday customers, especially those who might also face discrimination? I want this addressed at the highest level." "Understood." Tamara nodded vigorously. "Yes, ma'am." Ella turned to Ryan one last time. "Don't misunderstand. I believe in second chances. But you've shown an ugly side of gatekeeping that has no place in my airline or anywhere else. You need to reflect on this." Ryan stood silent, eyes cast down, face taut with shame. Ella took a deep breath, attempting to release the tension in her shoulders. The flight was already delayed, and she could see the weary expressions of passengers. Some wore sympathetic looks, others just wanted to get on with their journey. She motioned for Valerie to scan her pass. Valerie did so with an apologetic smile and trembling hands. As Ella walked down the jetway, she overheard Tamara berating Ryan for unprofessional conduct. She couldn't hear all the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Justice, it seemed, was being served. On board, Ella placed her carry-on in the overhead bin and settled into seat 4A. Flight attendants bustled about, clearly flustered by the delay. Ella recognized them from training sessions. They gave her respectful nods, likely alerted by Tamara's hurried message. But Ella just wanted a moment of respite to process what had happened. Anger, disappointment, and even a measure of sadness converged in her chest. She had built SkyShield Airways to be better than this, to stand as a beacon of equality and empathy. Yet, in a single interaction, one gate agent managed to tear at that vision. As the aircraft finally pushed back from the gate, Ella forced herself to breathe in and out, reflecting on the broader implications. If the airline's culture was truly as strong as she hoped, then Ryan was an outlier. But if not, this incident might only be a symptom of a deeper sickness, one she would need to root out, swiftly and decisively. The climb out of Hartsfield-Jackson was smooth, the city shrinking beneath the plane's wings. Ella gazed out the window, her emotions still raw from the confrontation. A lifetime ago, she might have erupted, tears brimming over in anger or humiliation. But years of leading a company had taught her to channel those feelings into productive outcomes. She mentally laid out her next steps, speak with legal, with HR, with the airline's training department, and possibly issue a public statement if needed. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, Ella clicked open her laptop. She had emails to review and urgent messages about the new route launch in San Diego. But her mind kept drifting back to the gate agent's face, his disbelief, his condescending manner. It all reeked of the prejudice she had fought against her whole life. The sting of it was all the sharper because it came from someone wearing a SkyShield uniform. She typed a quick note to Tamara, thanking her for her assistance and requesting a full report of the incident. She wanted an official record time, date, witness statements, everything. Next, she composed an email to the Chief Operating Officer, clarifying her own account of what transpired and stating her intention to address the matter personally. Ella's approach to leadership had always been hands-on, delegating something this vital felt wrong. Midway through writing, a gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. A flight attendant named Celia leaned in with a concerned smile. "Miss James, would you like anything to drink? Water? Coffee?" She lowered her voice, glancing at the unopened snack tray Ella had on her lap. "I heard about what happened at the gate. I'm so sorry." Ella looked up, grateful for the kindness. "Thank you, Celia. A glass of water would be great." Celia nodded. "Right away." She paused, then added softly, "And don't worry. The rest of us have your back. That gate agent was out of line." Ella offered a weary smile. "I appreciate that." Once hydrated and somewhat calmer, Ella returned to drafting a plan of action. She scrawled bullet points in her digital notebook. 1. Immediate HR investigation. Ensure compliance with anti-discrimination policies. 2R retraining program. Reinforce values of inclusion, respect, and courtesy at every level of customer interaction. 3. Accountability measures. Create a system where incidents like this are flagged early and addressed transparently. 4. Communication strategy. Decide how to communicate this to the rest of the company, possibly to the public, to reaffirm SkyShield's stance on zero tolerance for discrimination. The flight attendant's kindness reminded Ella that one bad apple did not define her entire airline. She had seen countless examples of her staff going above and beyond for passengers. Yet she also knew that letting this slide would signal complacency. SkyShield needed to make a strong, unequivocal statement that prejudice would never be tolerated. About halfway through the flight, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Lawson speaking. We're cruising at 35,000 feet and making good time. Expect to land in San Diego ahead of schedule. On behalf of SkyShield Airways and our CEO, Miss Ella James, we thank you for choosing to fly with us today." A small wave of applause rippled through the cabin as Ella's fellow passengers looked around, some eyes settling on her. She felt a momentary flush. She rarely drew public attention to her presence, but evidently the pilot felt compelled to acknowledge her. She nodded in polite acknowledgement. A younger passenger, a few rows behind, even chirped, "You rock, Ella," which caused a ripple of laughter. Despite the tension at the gate, Ella allowed herself a moment of pride. She had come a long way from the wide-eyed girl dreaming under the planes in Atlanta. Now, she was recognized mid-flight as a pioneer, a leader, and an inspiration to some. But her mission was far from over. In many ways, Ryan's disrespectful treatment of her underscored how much work was left to do. The rest of the flight passed uneventfully. Ella briefly closed her laptop and let her eyes drift shut, recalling how she used to daydream about owning an airline. Now that dream was real, carrying her through the skies in an Airbus she had helped procure. That was something to celebrate, even amid the day's turmoil. When the plane began its descent into San Diego, Ella felt a tingling sense of anticipation. This city represented expansion, growth, and the culmination of countless hours of negotiation and logistical planning. SkyShield was betting big on a West Coast presence, and Ella wanted to ensure a smooth launch. Despite the emotional upheaval, she was determined to keep pushing forward, yet also resolved to address the day's events with the seriousness they deserved. She reminded herself that adversity had always fueled her progress. From her earliest days, Ella had turned setbacks into stepping stones. Now was no different. If Ryan thought he could undermine a passenger's dignity, much less that of the CEO, He was about to learn the hard way just how fiercely Ella defended her airline's values. The moment Ella landed in San Diego, her phone buzzed with a flood of messages. Tamara had already forwarded a preliminary incident report, accompanied by statements from Valerie and other staff. The gist: Ryan had exhibited unprofessional conduct and displayed what might be interpreted as racially biased behavior. Ella arranged a video call with the Human Resources Director and Chief Operating Officer for later that evening. Before that, she had to oversee the festivities around SkyShield's new route launch. Local tourism bureaus had organized a small welcome celebration in Terminal 2, complete with a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Ella arrived to applause, cameras flashing as she stepped into the terminal. She forced a gracious smile, though her thoughts lingered on the morning's altercation. After the ceremony, Ella politely declined dinner invitations, retreating to her hotel suite to focus on what came next. Once she was settled, she opened her laptop and dialed into the video conference. The HR director, Clarissa Mead, a poised and compassionate woman, greeted Ella with a somber expression. The coup, a no-nonsense executive named Christopher Ng, looked equally grave. Ella spared no time. "Thank you both for joining. I'm sure you've read the report by now." Clarissa nodded. "Yes, Miss James. We're deeply concerned and apologize on behalf of the airline." Christopher chimed in. "Ryan West has been temporarily suspended, pending a full investigation. But given the details, it's likely we'll move for termination." Ella exhaled. The notion that someone would lose their job weighed on her, even if they had behaved inexcusably. "Look, I don't enjoy firing people," she said, "but I need to ensure this never happens again. I want an immediate refresh of our diversity and inclusion training, with emphasis on properly verifying passenger information without bias." Clarissa agreed. "I've drafted a plan to retrain all gate agents, effective immediately. We'll also incorporate new role-play scenarios, including subtle forms of bias, so staff can learn to recognize and counteract them." Christopher added, "That's good. We should also consider a public statement, reaffirming SkyShield's commitment to an inclusive environment. This incident may already be circulating on social media. Some passengers at the gate were recording on their phones." Ella stiffened. The possibility of a public relations storm was real. "Yes, let's get ahead of it. Issue a clear statement. We won't name Ryan specifically, but we must acknowledge the incident. Make it unequivocal that we have zero tolerance for discrimination." Both executives nodded, taking notes. Ella ended the call, feeling both relief and heaviness. Relief, because a plan was in motion to rectify the injustice. Heaviness, because it underscored how deeply ingrained prejudice could be. She recalled the many times she had personally faced discrimination, from suspicious stares to outright hostility. Even after she had climbed to the top of her field, prejudice had found a way to greet her at her own gate. The next morning, Ella's phone buzzed with a text from Tamara, updating her on Ryan's reaction. It turned out that he had been unapologetic at first, claiming Ella was playing the race card. But the evidence stacked against him was irrefutable, and he eventually broke down, admitting to personal biases he never realized he held. He had tearfully asked for another chance, but the top brass were resolute. Bigotry had no place at SkyShield. He would be let go. Word spread quickly among employees. Some reacted with shock that Ella herself had been blocked from her own plane. Others openly applauded management's swift action. Many felt a renewed sense of pride in working for a company that stood by its values, even when that meant firing people. Within a week, Ella and her executive team expanded the retraining program beyond gate agents, extending it to flight crews, customer service representatives, and even corporate staff. The airline launched an internal initiative called Empathy in Flight, which provided workshops and open forums for employees to discuss biases, share experiences, and learn from one another. Ella insisted on attending some of these sessions in person, eager to both listen and lead. She told her own story, not just of the recent incident, but of her years navigating discrimination in aviation. The results were remarkable. Employees opened up about microaggressions they'd witnessed or experienced. Some admitted to unconscious biases they hadn't realized were affecting their work. The environment became one of healing and mutual understanding. While Ella knew that one training program wouldn't solve centuries of systemic prejudice, it was a start, a tangible step toward creating the airline culture she envisioned from the beginning. Meanwhile, Ryan faced the hardest karma of all, public accountability. Word leaked to local media that he had been terminated due to discriminatory behavior against SkyShield's CEO. News outlets ran the headline, "Gate Agent Blocks Black Woman from Boarding She Owns the Plane and the Airline." Ryan's name wasn't always in the coverage, but rumors circulated. He found himself the subject of public scorn, struggling to secure a new job in the airline industry. Ella did not delight in his downfall, but she also wouldn't shield him from the consequences of his actions. In the aftermath, Ella carried a bittersweet satisfaction. She had built SkyShield to be better than this. Despite Ryan's transgression, she knew that change was possible. She was seeing it firsthand in the empathy sessions, in the outpouring of support from fellow employees, and in the letters from passengers thanking her for taking a stand. The airline emerged stronger, more unified, and more committed to being a safe, respectful haven for all. A few months later, Ella found herself at the same terminal in Hartsfield-Jackson, where the infamous incident occurred. This time, she was en route to a speaking engagement at a national aviation conference in Seattle. The gate area looked much as it always did, bustling crowds, announcements echoing overhead, families hurrying to make connections. She approached the check-in desk, half expecting a jolt of anxiety or a flashback to that day. Instead, she was warmly greeted by a gate agent sporting a bright SkyShield pin and a smile that reached her eyes. "Welcome, Miss James. Traveling to Seattle with us today?" Ella's shoulders relaxed. "Yes, indeed. Thank you." The agent handed over her boarding pass without hesitation. "We appreciate you flying with SkyShield, Miss James. Thank you for everything you do." The sincerity in her voice was evident, and Ella felt a gentle wave of gratitude. As she moved away from the counter, a sense of closure washed over her. Things had changed. Boarding proceeded smoothly. No suspicious glances, no mocking questions, just courteous service. Ella settled into her seat, recalling the turbulence of the past months. The shift in the airline's culture was already palpable. Policies had been updated to emphasize respect and efficient verification. Employee morale soared after the empathy initiatives, and Ella had the data to prove it. Fewer customer complaints, higher retention rates, glowing performance reviews. As the plane lifted off, Ella thought back to the conversation she'd had with her mother. Denise's health had improved, and she proudly followed every milestone of Ella's journey. She often told Ella that adversity was just another kind of fuel, painful, but it could ignite powerful change if harnessed correctly. Ella smiled at that thought, watching the clouds swirl beneath the wing. Her phone buzzed with an incoming email. She opened it to find a note from the lead coordinator of the aviation conference, informing her that the keynote address was sold out. "Attendees are eager to hear from the visionary behind SkyShield," the email read. Ella's lips curved into a soft grin. She felt the swirling mixture of awe and responsibility she always experienced when acknowledging her success. But she knew that success was more than just profits or expansion. Real success was measured in how many lives she could uplift, how many minds she could change, and how many barriers she could break down along the way. The rest of the flight was peaceful. When she deplaned in Seattle, Ella prepared her talking points for the conference. She planned to speak candidly about the gate agent fiasco, how a single incident revealed the need for systemic checks and balances, and how SkyShield turned that adversity into a catalyst for cultural transformation. If her story could inspire other industry leaders to adopt more ethical, inclusive practices, then the pain she'd endured would have been worth it. After all, Ella had always believed that the sky was not the limit, it was the runway. Each takeoff was a lesson in rising above, each landing a chance to ground oneself in reality. She had soared beyond countless storms, both literal and metaphorical, and each time she learned something about the power of perseverance and the importance of unity. Owning an airline wasn't just about controlling flight routes and profit margins. It was about fostering a vision that took flight in the hearts and minds of everyone who came aboard. In the days and years ahead, Ella would continue to push boundaries, expanding routes, investing in eco-friendly aircraft, and mentoring the next generation of aviators. She would remain vigilant, aware that prejudice could rear its head again, but confident in the robust frameworks she'd set in place. Through every cloud and patch of clear sky, she would remember that her journey was about more than personal ambition. It was a testament to how high anyone could soar when they embraced both courage and compassion. So there you have it, the incredible story of Ella James, the black woman who dared to dream of flight, only to be challenged by prejudice at the very gate of her own airline. But she turned that moment of humiliation into a wake-up call, an opportunity to reinforce the inclusive values she'd painstakingly built. From a humble girl in Atlanta to the powerful CEO of SkyShield Airways, Ella's journey serves as a stirring reminder that vision, coupled with resilience, can overcome even the darkest clouds. If this story moved you, if it resonated with your sense of justice and hope, we'd love for you to become part of our community of storytellers and dreamers. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue bringing you tales that challenge, inspire, and uplift. Let's spread Ella's message far and wide. The sky is only the beginning, and we all have the power to soar.